semana me reúno con el Álvaro. Me puso Felipe.
El Gunther, le voy a admit. Te dejo.
Ya. Ok.
Hola, Carmen.
Hi, Gunther.
Buenos
How
días.
are you?
Very good. Muy bien.
Qué bueno.
How are you?
Good. How was your confinement?
Oh, not so bad. I mean, the weather's been nice. I've been going on runs. The family was out of town this weekend, though. They actually had a great weekend.
Where did they go?
They went to a hacienda. I can't remember the name of it. It's just anyway, and it's a horse ranch. So my daughter loves riding horses. So they spent the weekend riding horses, and that sounds great.
Yeah, that does sound great.
Yeah, but I was here working.
I hope it wasn't working on the presentation.
It was, but that's okay.
Hi, Gunther.
Hey, Fernando.
Hey, Gunther.
Yeah, so it came in. I think we're coming in a little hot, but I think it'll be. I mean, I'm hoping it'll be a good session today. I shared the prezo with both of you guys.
Yeah, I saw it.
You saw, yes.
I saw it. It looks great.
Okay, real quick, there's just like a lot of info in here, and my basic philosophy today is sort of give people a bunch of info, right? We can discuss it, maybe set the stage for like the sessions on Friday, right? I'm going to try to keep it conversational as much as I can. So want to start out with a little bit of an icebreaker, which I just added at the last minute, and it'll be leveraging one of my favorite tools. So part of this might be a little bit of an intro to a collaborative tool that I love. It's called Miro. I don't know if you guys have heard of it.
Yeah.
But that's like, I live with that thing now. So what I was sort of figuring out, we get as a little intro for everybody, we'll get everybody up and going, right, in that, because you can use it via the web app, right? And then that'll be a place for people to keep notes and chat about things. And then I was planning to share the presentation with everybody, just so that they can go through back and forth.
Yeah,
right?
because there's a bunch of information you're not going to be able to go through.
Yeah.
And if you share that, it'll be great.
Yeah, so I can walk through it, right, and talk about it. And it's a bit text heavy, but I figured that might be helpful too in this case, given that we're, remote, right? People can look at it. They can, if they have it's full of links, right? So I'm assuming that, people want to take a look at that. And then we'll see how it goes.
Okay, so I'm gonna let everyone in, and
okay,
we'll continue this conversation.
Okay, great. Sounds good.
¿Yo te distraigo o qué?
Hola con todos los que van llegando.
Hello, everyone.
Buen día.
Hola.
Hola, buen día.
Buenos días.
Yeah.
Canta el Ronald con su setup de podcaster.
Sí.
Hola, buen día.
No se sabe cuándo va a ser un podcast, Roman.
En cualquier momento, no se sabe. Hay que estar preparado.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, good morning, Gunther.
Good morning.
Hello.
So this morning's an English session. I wanna have Fernando introduce Gunther, though I've known Gunther for a little while now, but Fernando knows him very, very well. So I'll let Fernando introduce Gunther, though it's a pleasure to have you here. Gunther, thanks so much for your time today and for your time preparing the session. And just heads up, we're gonna set up a couple of office hours on Friday with Gunther. We haven't yet distributed the slot I have with him. So after this, I'll set up a Calendly and you guys can let me know how many of you are gonna use that. Yeah, so Fernando, go ahead.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here Monday morning. Today, I have the immense pleasure of introducing Gunther Hardwig, who's a great professional from the Bay Area, from San Francisco, who's worked in several startups. He'll tell you more about it, but mostly he's an old friend of mine, great friend from college. We studied together, amazing guy. So you guys are in great hands. And welcome, Gunther. Take it away.
Right on. Thank you very much, guys, for the intro, and howdy, everybody. It's very nice to see you all, and I'm very excited to be involved in Programa here, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you guys some service and a little bit of help today and over the course of the week. Let me just take this moment and seize the screen. Actually, Carmen, can you give me
just a second.
Share?
Then you're done. Now you can share.
Awesome, thank you. So hopefully y'all can see my screen here. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Right on. So yes, so today I'm hoping to do a little bit of an introduction to the discipline and topic of user experience, and hopefully within that give you guys some tools and techniques to help further your businesses, and maybe even also spark some other thoughts and areas for you to dig in more. So with that being said, let me just kick things off, right? So here's a bit of the agenda that I set up for us today. And so hopefully we've got an hour and a half. We'll see how things go. One thing I like to start out with just a little bit of introductions and an icebreaker to get things going. Talk a little bit about the value that UX brings for business. Dig in a little bit more about what is user experience and product design, sort of at a higher level. And then talk a little about as I think about it as a practitioner, the areas of focus that we really dig in on, and then talk a little bit more in depth about certain techniques within product development, within the craft itself, research, and have some QA as well. So just on that, when I think of the purpose for the presentation here, right, like I said, provide a high level overview of the practice, right, share some sources of information with you guys that maybe you can dig into later. So think of it as a syllabus, right? Maybe identify some of the challenges you guys face as growing startups. And as part of this lineup, potentially some topics for our Friday office hours. A note just on this too, that I'm mostly going to focus on like technique and practice and not necessarily like management type issues for like design teams and that sort of stuff. Although that's obviously a topic that's of interest to people, but maybe that might be a follow-up. And then of course, I want to keep this conversational, right? And so ways to ask questions and that sort of, and as opposed to just me sitting here and lecturing at everybody throughout. So, and it's a challenge in these remote environments to do that sort of thing. But so one of the things I'd love to start out with is first a little bit of an intro of myself, and then a little bit more about you guys. And I've got an icebreaker exercise for us to go through here in a second. So also throughout this, I want to make sure that things are going smoothly. I sometimes do have a tendency to speak a lot and speak rapidly, so I'll try to pause every now and then and give people the opportunity to catch up and ask questions as needed. Okay? So anyway, about me, right? I am a director of user experience and product design. I'm currently working at a company called Drone Deploy, which is a startup. I think we're at maybe our C or D round. But it's a startup based in San Francisco that is employing drones to provide a wide variety of analytic capabilities to industries such as agriculture, construction, energy, and that sort of thing. So that's been cool. I've been there for a couple of years running a small team and building out what we're hoping is going to be what's the world's premier reality capture platform. Previous to that, I've been working in the industry for like the last 20 years, since it didn't even really have a name as far as the design is concerned. I've had experience at large and small organizations, as you can see from here, everywhere from big ones like I was at Google for a while, or YouTube. I've been involved in like small scale stuff where it's like what people less than 10. So it's been a wide variety of different sort of types of organizations over the years. The last 10 years or so has been mostly focused on startups. And in that time, I've also had the opportunity to work on a wide different bunch of different industries and topic areas, right? Video authoring, fintech, health and wellness, right? And now most recently, this basically flying robots, which is fun. And then in addition to that, as Fernando mentioned, we went to college together back at Mona College. My degree is in anthropology, right? And that's actually one of those interesting things when you look at how people get into this discipline, like their backgrounds come from. And so for my sense, one of the things that was interesting from that is that I brought a whole bunch of the research techniques and stuff that I'd learned there to the practice here. And that's actually been something that's been very valuable over time. So with that, I'd actually like to do a quick little icebreaker using one of my favorite tools out there. And I'm going to sort of step back for a second here. And what I'd like everybody to do, if you can all open up the Miro chat, or not, sorry, not the Miro chat, but the Zoom chat, and we're going to take a few minutes on here, put your email addresses in there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add you to a tool that I love that provides collaborative capabilities. So if everybody, let me see, I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment and can everybody open up the chat there? Great. Now give me a few minutes while we do a little housekeeping on this. What I'm going to do is first, I'm going to share this presentation with all of you so you can follow along and look at the information. So as I speak to it, you can also make reference, take notes, go to the links to look for more stuff. So give me a few minutes while we do all this.
Let me know if I can help in any way.
Yes, I've actually shared the Prezo with you, Carmen. Right, you have the Prezo. Why don't you take all these names and add them to the Prezo, and I will add everybody to the Miro board. That'd be fantastic. Thank you. Now, what you'll need for this tool I'm going to be sending invitations to is it's a tool called Miro, which is a collaborative whiteboard, basically. And all you need to be able to do is if you see an invitation, hopefully showing up in your email, launch a web browser and do it. Will take a few minutes for you guys to get on board. Hopefully this will work for everybody. It's certainly worked plenty for me in the past. And it might even be something that y'all are familiar with. But I really like it. It's a way for people to share, to input all sorts of different kinds of content, right? Everything from pictures to doodles. We use it extensively in my work.
So the fastest way to share the presentation, Carmen, I think I just changed it to share with anyone with a link. And I'll just post a link here.
Oops.
Oh, that's great. And I also just added everyone, just copied everyone from the invitation, from calendar to the slide. So everyone both received both as of right now.
Because I'm not seeing that.
Let us know if you received the presentation. And
I see people starting to appear in the board.
yeah, and here's the link for the presentation. In the chat, Fernando just put it there.
Okay.
Thank you to everybody for your patience in getting this going here. Now, while we do this, I can explain a little bit further about what I'm hoping everybody can do right here. You might see it. Actually, there's quite a few more people on the meeting than I expected. So I can see a few people poking around here, right? For those who are just joining in here, take a look around Moreau, right? There's a toolbar. There's a number of different areas in which you're able to do certain things. You might see that there's right in the center is a little set of slides that have my name and a picture and a little something about me. And so what I'm hoping everybody can do is put your name in, add maybe a little note about something that's interesting to you or that you've recently learned, and maybe a photo of something that is sort of been fun or interesting lately. If you take a look in here, you'll see that I've been really getting, one of the things about being here in Ecuador is, of course, that you guys it's just the natural splendor. And I have been taking a lot of pictures. So I included one that I recently was able to take while I visited the resort Mashpi, which maybe you guys are all are familiar with recently. Anyway, it was absolutely fantastic. And I haven't even finished sorting all my photos yet. Not even close.
Yeah, we forgot to tell everyone that now you're working for Drone Deploy, but from Quito, right?
From Quito, yes. So I'm actually here in Quito right now.
Where's the zoom?
Where's the zoom?
Yeah.
In the lower right-hand corner, or if you have a scroll on it, you can zoom in and zoom out.
Okay.
Okay, I hope I got everybody. If you didn't,
I didn't, I think.
okay.
Yeah, me too.
Who just raised their hand there?
Paul and Carmen. Jorge,
Okay, just give me a second here.
as he has it.
There we go, Jorge, just a second. And who else? Paul.
Paul at Mercatelli.
I haven't received it either. Rafael Roldan.
Okay, just a second.
Okay. Where's the insert image? Fuck.
So all you need to do is copy something and paste it, and it should appear for you.
From any.
So here, Antonio at Picker, Paul, also Roberto Guerrero. You're receiving a bunch of
I'm seeing
mails
more
here
people
in
show
the
up.
chat.
Sure
Yeah.
that I got everybody here. Got a Tom, I see you here. Now, the lesson we're learning, obviously, right off the bat, is that sometimes these things take a little bit to get going. I'm going to add a couple more of these. All right, how are we doing? We got anybody else missing?
I'm missing. I don't know if you were able to put this one on. I'll just type it here.
Got it.
Rafael Roldano.
Rafael, here we go. And what I'll do now is I'm going to go back to sharing this. Rafael, did you get it? Awesome. Take a couple more minutes. Now, I take it you guys haven't gone through this whole thing. I've had the chance to like hang out and meet each other maybe a little bit through the course of the program. For myself, it's nice to meet you all. Again, I'm hoping that as we go through this, I can learn a little bit more about you and your businesses. It's cool to see. All right, I see what we got going on here. A bunch of stuff happening. Real quick, sort of way to see how this tool works, right? Over on the side here, there's a set of tools, most important one, of course, being your little pointer to collect and drag things, sort of things. Actually, just sort of click in on these things. They're like post-it notes, right? One of the favorite tools of UX designers and product managers, I'd say, around the world is being able to use post-it notes to share ideas, concepts, rearrange stuff like that. So you can think of this tool as basically, if you're not familiar with it, being like a whiteboard, right? I can draw on it, I can put things, stickies on it, but I can also do more than that. I can paste images from elsewhere. And I see, okay, a couple more here, folks here we go. So, Jorge, I just sent you one. Juan, let's get you there too. Agrazon, are you in? And Rafael, make sure you're there.
Yeah, I haven't gotten yet.
Okay, Rafael, was that you?
Yeah.
All right, I just sent it again, so hopefully you'll get there.
All right.
Now, this is also something like, well, you guys are taking a look at this. We can also then jump back and start going on with some of the other content as you guys get the chance to do this. Hold on. Now, the idea here, as I put forward this to everybody, is we use these tools a lot as we're going about the process and practice of design, product management, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to share something with us for people to like do a little intro to themselves, as well as potentially take notes, write things down as we go through throughout the course of the day. And it could be whatever you'd like, right? You can navigate around, you can find yourself a little space, put your stuff in there. Then we can all look at it and share at some point. So Paul, I see, so this is taking a little longer, then there we go. There we go.
I don't know if everyone remembers, Daniel Weinman told us that he uses Miro a bunch nowadays with his team.
There we go. Okay, Paul, did you get it? And Juan?
Yeah, right now.
Right on, okay. Well, we'll come back to this in just a little bit. While you guys are taking a look there, let me
Oops. Sorry.
all good.
Everyone. How do I resize that image? Fuck.
Grab it and scale it. While you guys are doing that, well, I'll jump in a little bit and start talking about a few of the things that are some topic areas for us to discuss over the course of the week, right? So the first of which is we hear about this thing called user experience design and product design, but what actually is the value that it brings for businesses, right? And I know all of you are entrepreneurs, you're all getting started off, you're thinking about a whole bunch of different things about how you make your business go forward. But it's one of those things like design is sometimes an afterthought. Design is sometimes something that people don't necessarily know how much they should spend their time investing in, right? So I want to put this forward to y'all, right? Have you ever encountered a situation like this? You see what's happening,
Yeah.
right? We've got a situation in which somebody's trying to do something and they're unable to do it because what seems like it should be obvious isn't. This is a classic example right here. It's what we call a Norman door. Now, one of the things that's important to consider, right? Innovation today is very inextricably linked with design. And we've reached that point where people recognize within businesses, right, just how important it is basically for the bottom line, right, that we need people to be able to do the things that we want them to do in order to accelerate our business forward. What we just saw was an example of, again, what we call the Norman door. There's a very famous practitioner named Don Norman, who you may have heard of. He's famous for writing a book called The Design of Everyday Things. And the thing we call a Norman door is an example of, if you go around, you might find doors out there that say things like push, when really they mean pull. Or the handles themselves suggest one action versus the other, right? And this is used as a common example of how we often think we've designed something that may work for people, but it doesn't at all. It's counterintuitive. And as far as businesses are concerned, if we can't get people to do the things we want them to do, we're not going to get anywhere, right? The business isn't going to thrive, and we aren't going to actually meet any of our goals. So it's a good example as you think about things, about how why design considerations make a big difference and can actually be extremely helpful, again, for your business in ways that might not always seem directly intuitive. As Don points out here, right, good design is often hard to see. Bad design is very easy to see because all of a sudden I'm blocked from doing what I'd hoped to be doing, right? Oh. So one of the things to remember as we go through and talk about this is what the value for business is. Right, from practicing, putting in good practices for product design user experience, right? A few of the top ones that you can immediately come to mind: reducing development costs, the ability to convert leads into paying customers, overall increase in revenue. And then there's some of the other more ephemeral things that are out there that can be helpful, but it's like driving positive word of mouth and helping build that thing we call brand, right? Which is sometimes very hard to encapsulate in specific numbers, but we all can recognize is very important for our businesses to grow and thrive, right? One of the things you can see here, and I highly recommend taking a look at this report. McKinsey recently, or actually several years ago, did a massive report on large-scale organizations and the value that design can bring to them. And from their conclusions, we can see that those businesses that invested in design practices saw revenues, right, and returns that were almost double what you can see for those who hadn't actually spent time investing in those practices. So I know, again, for all of you, many of you out there, business type folks thinking about this sort of thing, sometimes you got to figure out, how do I make this relate to where I'm actually spending my resources? And I think some of these studies and sources out there can help manifest, help you rationalize that as you go forward and look at how you spend your time and money. Okay, so following from that, let's get into the question. What is user experience design? Now, a question for all of you out there. Is this a term that's familiar to you? Do you know anything about this? Or is this something that seems a little archaic or arcane and not really very understandable? Just a quick show of hands. Is design something that, like, you guys have all had the chance to think about, or is it, for most of you, is it something that's somewhat new and you get to learn a lot about it? I'll take that as a yes. Anyway, going on from there, what is this practice that we call user experience and product design, right? There are two things that come into it, right? Design is a process that actually is applicable beyond just things that we talk about like art or whatever. Design is the process of making things, right? Designing it, and the product of that process, a design, right? You often hear the term design can be used for all sorts of different practices. We hear it used in engineering, we hear it used in software development, and of course, we often hear about it associated with art, right? But design is the process, really, when it comes down to, is a problem solving, of figuring out something that needs to be done and providing a solution for people to accomplish the goals that they set out to do, right? Or that they want to achieve. Right? User experience is a term that's come up to encompass all the different aspects of sort of how a user interacts with a company and its products, right? It's a broad term, right? It can be used from everything from how we do customer support to what we're talking about specifically here is how we design and develop the products that we ship out to customers, right? So when we look at what user experience design is, it's actually a big collection of a bunch of different sort of practices and disciplines, right? And I like this chart here to show how all of these things actually sort of fit together and all the different areas that we touch on. As I mentioned earlier, my background is in anthropology, which means I've studied a lot of sort of research methods, right? Ways in which you get out there, talk to people, try to understand them, right? And sort of categorize their wants and needs and the ways and they go about their lives and the various behaviors that they use to accomplish tasks, right? But so that's just one aspect of what we call user experience design. As you can see here from this list, it involves, that I just mentioned, things like user research, right? What we call product design, which is thinking about the product holistically, interaction design, which is the very small micro parts that you think about when you put together software, things like other kinds of testing, usability testing. But then there's also that aspect that of just how things look, the visual design, and what they say, things like content strategy and brand strategy. That we won't talk about necessarily brand strategy stuff today, but it is something that's of great importance and influence when we talk about overall user experience design. Right? The basic process that one often wants to go through, if you think about this, how we move through, right, from beginning to end, is that the basic user experience research process, or user experience process, goes from the idea of first off starting out with research, bringing in insights, then sort of formulating a vision, coming up with concepts, designing experience, and then shipping it out. And throughout each of these, there's a wide variety of subtasks that we might be doing. And of course, it's all a reinforcing cycle that should play back and be repeated over and over again as our products develop and mature. Right? Now, another thing I always like to point out to people when we go through this is that there's a hierarchy of doing this. And this is also very relevant, particularly for businesses just getting started who are trying to figure out where to put their time and energy. A friend of mine, actually a guy named John Zaratsky, who's a well-known practitioner and basically an instructor in user experience design practices, put together this notion of the different levels that you might think of as we do design throughout, as we're building out our companies and products, right? And this is something that I hear from a lot of entrepreneurs. How much time do I spend investing in this? What's going to work for me? The core thing is we need to put this together so that it works for your business. And there's ways in which we can think about it, sort of levels of design, right? Here's some concrete examples that can help you think about it, right? If you're all familiar with Craigslist, Craigslist is very basic. It's not pretty, but it gets the job done, and it's done exactly what that business needs for its users, right? You can think of it on second level of where we think about interaction design is how we're making things easy to use and understand. And here's an example from Uber in its early days. Uber wasn't as pretty as it is now, but it got the job done. It was easy to understand and people got right to it. At the top level, you can think of companies like Apple, obviously, is a big one. But another great example is Square, the point of sale provider, who started out from the beginning thinking very much about visual design in addition to the product and interaction design. And they have had great success with all this. But it's also just one of those things you have to take into account as you're going about and thinking about the resources, how you're advocating your company's resources, right? You don't have to necessarily always make it pretty. People think this is weird when I say this to them. It doesn't have to be gorgeous. It has to accomplish the goals that you and your users are trying to accomplish. And that's really what's going to make you succeed in the long run. This is also particularly important when you look at the different types of businesses that you're working through, right? There's a consumer-oriented business. There's also business-oriented businesses, right? And some of the needs vary in there. And so accomplishing your goals is, it can change depending upon who that audience is. Another thing to think about when you're thinking about the overall practice of design and user experience, and again, I'm talking about some very high level concepts for everybody here, and this is just sort of to set the stage, think about how these things you approach them. Not all of it is directly applicable immediately, but it's something to think about as you go about crafting the way your businesses will grow and how you organize this thing we call product design and user experience, right? So one way to think about these is the different sort of elevations as you approach it. Most of the time, people are really thinking about the surface. And if you look down here, right, that's things like the typography, color, layout, all those things that are very much manifested in your project. As your business grows and as your department grows, you'll be thinking about these other areas, the structure, how it plays into the overall business strategy, and then making sure that my view from the design perspective is really integrating the entire company's offerings, the brand personality, traits, and business strategy. This takes a little while to sort of integrate and absorb, but I just want to put this stuff out there for you guys to think about over time as you start articulating out what it is that you are going to want to accomplish in design and in user experience. Right? So I'm going to pause there for a second. There's been a lot, I'm putting out a lot to you guys, but I want to make sure that I take a chance to, as we go through this, as I said, have it be conversational and make sure that if there are any questions that come up as we go throughout, that we're able to address them. So anything out there that strikes people, anything that that doesn't make sense or you'd like to chat about a little more, I'd love to hear your questions now.
I have a question there for everyone, but does anybody have a question before I go? No? I want to ask everyone in the slide right before the one that just came, the 3 levels, where do you guys think you are in a product design phase, or in an interaction design phase, or a visual design phase? Just let's have a quick survey here to see where you guys are at. Level 2, I'm seeing some responses here in the chat. Also you can just quickly say level 1 and 2. Someone said 3, level 3. So based on that, I wanted to ask Gunther, do you think this comes in a specific order because of a reason? And are there some cases where you can start in level 3, and do you have to make sure level 1 and 2 is covered? Or is there a risk in just starting in level 3 and not taking into consideration level 1 and 2? Can we have a conversation around that? And then I see Luciano has a question. You can come after.
That's a great question, and thank you for calling that out, Carmen, because you hear this a lot from people. And in fact, last time I chatted with some of you guys, somebody was talking about this and feeling guilty in a certain sort of way that they hadn't quite reached level 3 with stuff yet, right? Well, again, it doesn't necessarily have to be any of these things, right? It all matters on what's succeeding for your business. The example that I put out here for basically Square, right? Square from the beginning resourced themselves to think about all 3 of these levels at the same time, right? And part of the reason they were able to do that was because it was also founded by a guy who had been a successful entrepreneur in the past, right? And had money and resources to go out and like fill out all of his departments, right? That's not always the case for everybody, right? And a lot of that depends on what sort of target market you're going for, right? Obviously, some things like, particularly for consumer brands, right, or consumer products, a lot of the stuff about visual design can play an important role. But that doesn't necessarily always mean it has to be that, right? If something works for people, right, they will come and use your product. Again, using the example here of Uber, that's not the prettiest yet, there is it, right? Uber hadn't quite gotten their groove design-wise at the time, but the thing sure worked, right? It sure was awesome to be able to just call a car immediately and have it come. So to your question, Carmen, it's like, you don't necessarily have to do everything at once, but the main thing that is critically most important is having that base of a product design that really works and solves a need, right? It can be pretty as you want, and if it doesn't actually solve anybody's problem, it's not going to go anywhere, right?
Pretty is not UX.
Pretty is not UX. It's a good point. And that's a strong distinction, right? We want all of these things. The other part of it is people have expectations are much higher now, right? So there is definitely a bit of a requirement to do that, right? But it's not necessarily always absolutely critical for your business to succeed. I see somebody's that one that you've just raised your hand there, please. So yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi. Yes. My question was pretty much, I wanted to add something to Carmen's question. How not to confuse visual design with the interaction design. Like sometimes you think like, hey, I'm going to make it prettier here because that's going to make the customer easier to understand, but sometimes not the same. And that happens, at least to me, a lot. Like I want to make the app very pretty, but sometimes I make interaction mistakes, you know?
No, absolutely. And no, so that's the other important thing to draw a distinction here too, right? There's sort of how things look, right? But then there's sort of how they feel and flow. And we can talk about that a little more lately, right? What I really want to make sure is that I'm communicating, right? And then I have a very specific sequence of steps for people to accomplish that task that's very clear, right? And I see somebody noting here, A/B testing is your friend, right? So we can touch on some of those other things a little bit later as far as some of the techniques are concerned, but that's definitely something that's well worth keeping in mind, right? I can try a couple of things, compare them against each other, right? And see which ones resonates. To your specific question about making it pretty, right? I think that's the thing. Don't get too caught up in like, oh, what color is this? What font this is? That sort of thing. If that's your concern, make sure that the steps that people are going to take to accomplish the goals are clear and actionable and apparent to them, right? Does that address your question?
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool.
Luciano had a question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I see another hand raised over here. And that is,
Sí.
I'm not sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Estás en mute, Luciano.
Sí. Hi,
Hi.
Hunter. Hi, how you doing?
Yeah.
Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you as well.
Well, we're basically an app. So, you know, UX and UI is very critical for us. It's very important for us, okay? I have two questions. First, when do you know that you have the right design at the right time? You know, how do you know that? What are the key elements or the, you know, the flags that are telling you that you have the right design at the right time? How do you test that? How you know that your client, your customer is having a good UX, you know, a good user experience? First, this is the first question. And the second question is, you know that we have to evolve in time, you know, and sometimes when you're doing your design and you reach some point, you get to dead ends, you know, and you think that you have to redesign everything, start all over again. And how do you manage that? How do you know that you have these dead ends and you have to redesign everything, and how you deal with that? Okay.
Yep. Those are great questions, and I'll just jump right into some of those. The answers on some of that, which is obviously the fundamental need for research, right? And this is one of the things why I advocate for research throughout your entire process, from beginning to end, right? You quote unquote know these things based on a couple of different ways you can see it. First off is constantly talking to your customers just verbally in one way or another, so I gain a sense of what their needs are, right? And making sure you have a strong understanding of what it is you're trying to solve for them, right? Second part of that is when you're in the process of development, right? Making sure that you put your concepts out there for people to try out to see if it can accomplish that set of goals that you've established to begin with, right? So this is when you can, like, say, usability testing, things like that, right? The third part I'd say on this, of course, is looping back and making sure that once things are out in the market, right, or out there being used, that you're evaluating whether or not it's working. And this is where the notion of like metrics and stuff come in, right? And if you're not seeing them hit the things that you want, these are all indicators that you haven't quite gotten where you're supposed to be. I hope this is sort of addressing your question here, because it's definitely at multiple different stages within the development, right? And a lot of what will work, of course, depends on things that you've set for yourself, right? What goals do we want the company to accomplish, et cetera? So for example, if I've got like a flow, I want to have 20 people sign up or whatever, or 20,000 or whatever in a certain year. I want to raise that by a certain percentage, for example, right? You have to be checking in at each of those stages, right, with the design and the hypotheses you've put forward in order to know whether or not you've succeeded. Does that start to address your question?
Yeah, in some way. I mean, I wanted to know, again, how do you know that you have the right design at the right time?
I'm saying, so yeah, so a couple different ways are, for an example, put out there, right design at the right time is things like usability testing, where you put it out there and say, okay, this is the thing that actually worked for people, right? Second, of course, at the end is evaluating performance metrics is a big one, of course. It's like, are people actually responding to this? I mean, those are the very concrete ways in which you can test that, right? But not everything is direct, right, or necessarily tells you all the time the right thing. You have to know, sorry, let me phrase that in a different way. You have to have these other signals that you interpret as being the right, the indicator that you've got the right design at the right time, right? And when I'm speaking of this, I'm talking about the things that we talk here, user experience, right? Which means people able to accomplish the tasks that your product is meant to solve.
Okay, thank you.
We can dig a little bit more on that if you've got some specifics, like that'd be a great thing for topic, maybe later, like the breakout sessions, where if you've got something saying, hey, how do I evaluate this thing and specifically?
Yeah.
I could give some more feedback there directly. And I also want to put out there, I'm happy to, like, if anybody has any other questions, you know, to talk about these things, we can do it outside of the sessions. So, okay, I see a whole bunch of questions stacking up there.
Okay.
So thanks, thank you. Who's next?
Henry, I think.
There we go.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so we are definitely in level 1, which we still don't have much UI there. And I have come from a background of 2 very successful startups that started in level 1, then keep evolving to level 2 and 3. And right now, since we have been growing a lot, we have the resources to start improving. But my question is, we have been thinking about either do everything at once, like change the design, or do small improvements. So our biggest question is, our users are already with us for a year, so maybe a big change will confuse them, or maybe it will help. So we are in that moment where we don't know what's the best option to take.
Right. Well, I saw somebody point out something, that the technique of A/B testing, right? And that might be one of those areas that could be helpful for you guys. If you've got a specific thing that you want to change and you think that could be useful for them, but you're a little nervous on how they might react to that change, then this one of the tools in which, if you can, right, set up a situation in which some people see one version and another set of people see another version, right? And then you can compare between those to see which ones perform better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, understood.
But the other question is, like, again, this being like when you say you're down here at basically at the product design level, it also is the fundamental question you're trying to answer here, right? If you're seeing like, we want to expand ourselves, right, and provide new capabilities versus we're seeing a problem, for example, right? Like I wanted my users to be able to do X, but they're not able to do it, right? Isn't the same thing as like, okay, they're fine in accomplishing thing X, and I want to add something else to it. right? Now, the other thing I'd say is like, the truth of the matter is that most people out there are pretty durable and they can figure things out. So don't be too scared to make changes, right? And don't be too scared to add things. Sometimes people get a little caught up in that. It's like you cycle a little bit too much, like, oh my God, everybody, they won't be able to handle this. Well, they actually can figure things out. So you should feel free to try things and put it out there in front of and see what they do. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. I'm pleased to see this resonating, by the way. It's a very interesting topic and it comes up a lot, right? There's different sort of levels that we're at and people feeling like where I should be, right? And it can, and again, it's something, looking at people's different products, I could probably give a better assessment and help out a little bit more than that, not being totally familiar with it all. It's, it's a little hard to do at the moment, but look forward to engaging on that more. Okay, I see some great things going on in the chat over here, right? Talking about different things that people like. I see Hotjar, UXCam, Crazy Egg. Those are all some great tools. Since we're on this topic, I can just throw out there a bunch of different tools. Then I can share some of these for people to use to assess what's going on in your product throughout time. I am a big recommender of session recording tools. Hotjar is one of them, but I also like things like Full Story is another great tool to look at. And what those tools are able to do, in addition to being able to like see the numbers, right, as you might see in something like Mixpanel or what have you, but also to actually watch what people do on your product and identify where there might be problems. So those are something to consider and put that down as a note. Session recording tools, which is a little script that you might add into your product, and then you can go back and just like actually look at what people did and analyze different behaviors, see failure points, see what's working and seeing what's not working. Cool. All right. Well, so that was great. That's sort of a little bit of a high level on some of these things. Can definitely dig in on some of those more later. But what I'd like to jump in right now is talk a little bit more then about some of the sort of focus areas that I try to put forward to everybody as we go through, as you are going through the practice and building things up within your company, right? So I like to think of it as sort of divided. The user experience group is divided up into focusing in sort of these 4 areas. I'm really only going to talk about like the first 3. We've already talked about actually research a little bit. The team side put aside for later because it's management and all that sort of stuff is probably more than we have time for today. But talk a little bit about product development process and craft and a few things that I think are very helpful to have some tools in your tool belt to use. First off, maybe many of you have already gone through this sort of thing, but there's the important thing of thinking about the overall process of how we go about developing our tools and software, right? I'm an advocate of the notion of basically the triad within a product development team of design and user experience, product management, and engineering. Right? It's something that we all have to sort of like loop back and forth. Maybe you guys have seen this premise before, but the idea that with any project, I might want to have obviously I have my product manager who's helping guide the business decisions and what we're getting in what the outcomes should be, right? Product design and user experience is sort of showing how people accomplish those goals, and then engineering, which is actually creating the stuff. But there has to be a constant feedback loop between all these and collaboration in order for us to achieve the greatest thing, right? What we're looking for, which is a positive UX. So you can see in the middle of this little Venn diagram here, right? But consistently, of course, always talking and getting feedback from other elements of the business, right? Really business development, sales, customer support, marketing, and the customers, and then of course the customers themselves. In my current job, we have a lot of touch points, right, with different people out there in the industries and our customers, and it's really valuable to get that feedback from all sorts of different angles. Particularly when you talk about like what are the actual customer service folks hearing, right? That's like the word on the ground. That's a different voice though than you hear from like the salespeople who also have a tap into the business. But you need to make sure that you're balancing all these things together in order to get the right signal from what can oftentimes be very noisy, right? This right here, and maybe many of you already have sort of this stuff set out, but I think it's very important as you're building up your processes in your organizations to have a clearly articulated sort of sequence that you go through product development. right? There's a lot of different ways in which people think about that, agile, et cetera, Kanban, waterfall, all these are different kinds of tools that people use, but it's definitely important to make sure you're articulating, right, throughout your process, what you're trying to accomplish and what the decisions you're making to help you move through the stages, going from basically original discovery and planning all the way up to it actually being in wide release. Not going to go through all these sort of things here today. I put this out forward for everybody just as a framework to use, again, and it's shared in that presentation, so you can look in and dig in on this, right? Reading through all of this at the moment would take a long time, but I wanted to put that out there to sort of give you some of a framework to use if you haven't necessarily set this in your mind, or maybe to inform some of the practices you have out there, right? In particular, though, is when we look about, like, I want to move forward a little bit here, is talking about from a designer standpoint and like how we work to accomplish some of these goals out there. These are some of the tools of the trade that we put together that I advocate using and I'm using in my current role, right? And I think it's important to consider when you think about your designers and the team and how you share stuff around. So we're extensive users of Google Drive to store our sort of files, keep everything in one place. I use Jira a lot as a means of sharing status, right? And the main one being engineers use Jira. Well, let's be there where the engineers are, right? But then there's a couple other tools that I really love. Sketch is our design tool that everybody, that's common across the industry. There are other ones out there that people use. Figma is another good example, as well as the entire Adobe suite, right? Obviously Photoshop, et cetera, but those are some good ones for when talking about UI design and UX design. As I've just introduced you to Miro, which is a fantastic collaboration tool. I'm a huge fan of making flowcharts, of thinking about information architecture, which is some concepts that are important for everybody to get a full grasp of what the product is, right? Flowcharting is something that's very familiar within software development, but it's also critical within UX and thinking about how you make that the series of steps that people accomplish their tasks with, right? Then there's a couple other tools that I like out there too. There's one called Zeppelin, which is a way to share styles, share the elements that a developer needs to actually do the job and build the products that are released. So just a few to think about in there. I want to pause for a second there to make sure, just to check in, see if that's any questions that are coming from this, or if this makes sense, any thoughts people have about their processes, and maybe identify some of the issues you have with design as you go through your development cycle. No?
Yeah, I don't want to get ahead. I think maybe you're going to explain this later, but are you going to like later explain how you introduce the design sprint before the actual sprint? Like, how do you manage that transition? Because that's one of my main issues.
Well, let's jump into that right now. So you wanted to talk about sprints?
Like, yeah, like let me think how to explain. Like, yeah. In how much anticipation you work with the design sprint. So when you introduce it to the actual engineering team in their own sprint to make the tool, you know, like, do they go at the same time? It has like one step before the other one?
Yeah, excellent question. So what you're basically talking about is one of the ways we often work now is this notion of sprints, right? It's based on the agile methodology, right? Where we break down, and hopefully I'm characterizing what you're getting at here. The design, a sprint from an engineering standpoint is a period of time, 1 week, 2 weeks are common, right? In which we've broken down chunks of work, right? That people can accomplish within that period of time. And hopefully it adds up to something bigger, right? So that's one way that we go about getting actually work and shipping it out the door, right? The design sprint is a concept on how we would put together the stuff, again, basically the parts that would be used by engineers, but I would say it's a separate type of process, right? This design sprint is really, it's called a sprint because it's meant to be of short duration, right? Not a long period of time. So I would separate the two and say that the design sprint will inform what goes on into an engineering sprint, right? And so when we talk about introducing engineers to that, right, there's two ways you can go about it. One, you can just like not involve them at all, right? And just tell them what happens with the output of it, which is not necessarily a good thing. We all like to be involved, right? The second would be to actually make sure that when you're doing something like one of these sprints, is that there be engineering representation so that they're ready to actually put the work into practice when you're done. Right now, that might mean taking them off of their normal schedule a little bit, but it's definitely important because it actually accelerates the ability for people to implement when they have the knowledge of what's going on and the framework, right, that's been established for the decisions. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And usually the design team, when the design sprint ends, usually what you get is like everything documented. So when the engineering team goes on, they have because that's one of the main bottlenecks we have. Like it's usually engineering, they don't know how to do something, or they miss something in the process, and it makes a bad product at the end. So
yeah,
usually the design team documents everything on the design part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, one of the things that this is why it goes back to this notion of, remember that you hear things, like what we call waterfall, right? Where it's like PM, then design,
I know.
Right? That's why I advocate this notion of the collaborative process. Like, look, we all have our areas of focus, right? The designer's got to design, the engineer's got to build, the PM's got to track things, measure them, and that stuff, right? Define that sort of thing. But there should always be, as much as we can, right, the ability for people to know what's going on, right? Even if you're not always making the decision, being informed of the decision. One of the things about when we talk about the sprint notion is that it involves a whole bunch of people, it involves stakeholders of various kinds, it involves engineers, it involves product people and designers, et cetera. So at the very least, you've got an awareness, right, of how decisions were made and what they are by the time you start doing work, right? And that's one of those things that's key to keeping people moving fast, is like context awareness, right? Not having to switch back and forth or start from zero to understand how to get to something, right? So I'm a huge fan of this. And as you can see here, there's a few examples on this page of some of the ones that got in the past. And it really can help be an accelerant. I highly recommend picking up the book, reading some of these tools, and seeing how you can employ that process for yourselves. Hopefully that answered your question there.
Yeah, it does.
But thank you guys all for all this sort of stuff. I wasn't quite sure if we'd make it through all this material and what was going to resonate. So I'm glad to hear that people have questions. And of course, feel free to add your own thoughts on this. Call me out if you think I'm totally off base on some things. That's always the better part of these things, right? And add your thoughts to this.
So
okay.
I have one question.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's a good idea to mix the design sprint with the development sprint, mix the design with the software development in the same time.
It depends. So this, nobody wants to hear it depends, right? But it does. Some of it depends on the size and scale of the project you're trying to make, right? How big is the thing you're trying to do, right? And also what level of collaboration already exists between the different people on your team, right? There are some cases in which there's engineers and designers who collaborate very well and understand each other. And in that case, right, mixing that up can work very well, right? And it can help you move quickly, right? Sometimes, particularly if it's a concept that people aren't familiar with, or you have a sort of large one, right, in which you're not necessarily going to be deciding it all at the moment and need to do probably some cycles of conceptualizing and deciding what you really need to accomplish. It can backfire to try to mix them all up at the same time, right? Okay. So it depends, again, like I say, it depends a little bit on that. Sometimes it can move very quickly. How will ever say this to everybody flat out, that sometimes agile isn't. Isn't agile, right? And particularly when you're talking about products, concepts and design, always trying to line them up together can lead to a lot of frustration on everybody's part, and you need to separate them, right? That's just the reality of it. It can be challenging, and it is for everybody, no matter how much experience you have. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah,
or at least
it makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. So and then it definitely has to do with like the chunks that you're working in, the size, right? If it's like a feature and you can say, oh, we're going to iterate on this very quickly. And it's like, I can just see, all right, we just want to add this one thing in here and here and here, right? And see what people do, then it can work really well. But if you got a whole new concept you're trying to introduce to people, right? And you got to figure out what that is, then it can be hard to mesh the two.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, any other questions from that, or shall I take a next step? Cool. All right. One of the things I also, since we talked about this earlier, but it's also something that's very important, and this I'd actually, since we're on that, we talked about research a little bit. Research is important. Research is critical, right? And here we go, everybody's favorites, the guys from Pied Piper, right? Remember, we're not our customers, right? We have to really be thinking about them. It's not just about what we want to do or what seems neat, it's what they need, right? And so research is helping understand user characteristics, goals, et cetera, right? As much as you can, as much as possible. Everybody should be able to conduct research in one kind or another. I particularly find it interesting, and this is not to hit on engineers on this, but there's nothing more enlightening than seeing when an engineer watches somebody go through a process and fail, for them sometimes to jump out of this notion of, well, logically it should be like this, right? We can all get caught up in our own biases and our own ways in which we think people should accomplish stuff, and nothing helps you more than seeing people actually try to use your stuff, right, and it not work, to give you an enlightenment, say, okay, maybe we need to rethink this. It's incredibly important that everybody in the organization have the chance to have that level of like direct contact, I feel, right? So going through this, won't go through it, but here are some of the key things to consider as we go through and think about how to do research, what it is, what are we trying to understand, why are these important to the grid, are related to the business, right? It's always important to relate stuff back to the business. I take this as a designer, we have to make sure that we're trying to solve goals that the overall organization is trying to accomplish, right? We need to think about how we want to answer this. When should it take place? Going back to the question earlier, right? Like when should be always, but what will depend on sort of the type of questions that you've got on your mind and where you are in your development process, right? And then the other thing is always, of course, to remember, for whom am I doing this? Why is this information important? To whom? Is it somebody within the organization? Do I need to answer this question for myself? Do I need to answer the question for the developers? Do I need to answer this question for the chief executives, right? And maybe in some of these cases, you guys are all those things all at once, right? But so that's important to remember, but who the audience that you're conducting research for, right? Here again, you can take a look through this again. We won't go through this entire list, but just to identify what, to my mind, are some of the key things, the techniques that one might be using throughout the course of this development process, right? And the types of research that one might be conducting. I think it's helpful to remember these types of things. Like, look, doing market research is something that's very important at the beginning of the process, right? But it's not the same thing as when I'm in the middle of it, when I'm really going to be digging in deep and seeing, oh, is my proposed solution for this particular market or user going to work, right? On that, just it's the same sort of thing here, but seeing like how we might map some of these different techniques across this process. How you choose to do this might vary. Again, like I said, I'm always a fan of talking to people all the time, but there's other tools we can use that don't necessarily have to be constantly scheduled. For example, use surveys, use analytics, use third-party tools to try to measure things. Usertesting.com is an example of something that came up. We had Hotjar. Some of the tools that you use to do communication with people like Intercom also track things in ways that you can constantly be getting measures of people. I'm also a fan of using other gauges when we talk about surveys and stuff like that. Say, for example, the Net Promoter Scores, right? Which oftentimes people do in marketing, but it's always something you should keep in mind as you look to refining what you're putting out there for the market. Right? So just a few of those tools, as I said before, calls, surveys, analytics are critically important, not always in the purview of user experience, but something that user experience should be familiar with, right? Is actually looking at the numbers, right? And oftentimes this is run by product management, but a good user experience designer, product designer will understand what those things mean. right? Okay. I'm going to pause for a second there again on some of those, the research stuff, and see if there's any questions that people might want to dig in on and talk about with that. That was quick, right? But I'm certainly interested in hearing if anybody has any questions with regards to the sort of the research side of things.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, in some of these tools like surveys or something, when I take some of the info of my users, how can I see which is the best info that I can get? Sorry, I don't know how to explain myself. I have a lot of opinions. How can I choose which is the useful one?
Yeah, that's a great question, which is, and we're going back to one of the reasons why you have to have multiple sources of input, right? And multiple ways in which you're analyzing things, right? So that's so based, when you talk about like, I have a bunch of opinions, right? Those are opinions that come in. You have to balance those with your own opinions and with other information. So for example, a lot of people say they like X, right? Well, so that's what they say, right? Do you also have numbers, right? Analytics, metrics that you can use to balance against those. People might say they like a certain thing, but we actually see in their behavior on what they click on and that sort of thing, that it's not exactly that, right? The other one way, so that might be one way to balance against it. The other thing, of course, is to make sure you recognize where the feedback is coming from. Say, for example, you only talk to a certain set of people all the time, right? Obviously, their opinions are going to be the ones that you hear more often, might not be a full understanding of your entire audience. So you should spread out who you're actually soliciting or trying to gather the information from. Specifically to your question, where you're saying, how do I know which one is right? Sometimes you don't. And that's why you have to do these other things to test it, right? Like I'm saying, sometimes you don't know which one is right. So I heard this, I have a signal, right? I said, so 3 out of 5 people liked this. They said they want that. Okay, so then I set up another test to see if that's actually true, right? Based on what they've said, form a hypothesis, right? Put together a solution and then test that again too. And it might be 3 out of 5 people say they like a certain way to go about doing something. Okay, so I make a prototype, I put that back out there again, I see if they actually do it, if it works for them, and then I can draw conclusions.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Does that make sense? I know sometimes, again, like it's not always just one solution. You have to read one thing, interpret it, right? Get one piece of data, look at other types of data in order to balance against that and see if it's true.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, a lot of sense.
Cool. Any other questions? Right on. Okay, well, let's move on into one of the other things I just wanted to touch on with everybody is the actual sort of craft and practice that we go through. And this is one part of this is gonna jump to a higher level again, but I think it's something that's well worth considering for everybody out there. And that, as I put this, craft and practice is sort of the way in which the design team goes about thinking about the work, the specific ways in which we actually execute on certain things, right? But also how we conceptualize and sort of frame ourselves philosophically. And so to that, one of the things I think is, oops, that's not what I meant to do. One of the things that's a very useful tool across organizations is to establish yourself a set of principles, right? And principles are guidelines, ways in which we sort of think about the work that we're doing and the products we're trying to put out there and how we go about doing it, right? So as you can see here, right, a principle is a fundamental piece of advice for yourself and for the others around you. It helps inform what you're doing, but it also helps if everybody agrees on these things with decision making, with knowing what we want to do and what we accomplish and how to go forward, with having a lot of some of those points, particularly internal arguments and opinions, right? Some good examples of that, right, that are out there I put forward in the thing. You all may have seen from that initial graphic what we call the golden ratio. This is a visual aesthetic, how things, like it's the classic notion of like the proportions of thirds and things like that, right? That's one type of principle that you can perform. But some other good ones, right? You think about it is one of my favorites, form follows function, right? This is one to consider, like actually the aesthetics of it are less important than what the thing actually does. That's a very real sort of principle that people have out there, right? Another one to consider too is sometimes these are anti-patterns, right? With the notion of like garbage in, garbage out, right? You have to remember, right, and take these things into mind. I mean, we don't necessarily want to have a principle of garbage in, garbage out, but it is something that becomes true when we look at stuff, right? If we have stuff that's not good coming into the system, right, going out, it might not be so good as well. There's lots of other ones out there. I can share some of the ones that are like, you can look to, by the way, to a lot of them, big companies, they've articulated these principles, like Apple has. A lot of them have these sort of ways in which they do that and helps frame what they accomplish, right? Within my current organization, one of the things we do is we have a set of principles that are for the entire company, right? And this is another thing to consider here. This can be helpful for everybody. It goes along with the notion of mission, et cetera. But we say, this is what we say to ourselves. We want to make it happen. We want to build trust and we want to simplify. So in this case, I took these and for our team, evolved them into another set of principles that we use to help guide our designs when we're working, right? We want to stay user-focused, right? We want to always be thinking about them and how we're accomplishing their goals, not ours necessarily. Obviously, they should coincide, right? We want to make things accessible. So one of the things about the tool that I'm working on at the moment is not only want to make it accessible in the notion of for people with different sort of capabilities, right? So something like people out there who are colorblind, can they actually look at these things and see it? But also we want to make it accessible because our tool is used in a wide variety of locations. It's not just in the office. People are out in the field, literally the field, right? Standing next to the edge of a bunch of crops. They might have connectivity issues. They might have sun glaring down on things. We want to make sure that the tool is always there for them so that they can, right, make use of it and get the value that we're promising them. And then the other side of that we're going for is to make things consistent, right? So that they know that no matter where they are, it will operate more or less the same. It'll look more or less the same. There's definitely always little differences here and there, but making sure that for the most part, right, it's the same across the board really makes a huge difference and adds all those other things we've talked about. People are able to accomplish their goals and so on and so forth, right? And the business thrives. So these are just a few to think about, right? And something that I highly recommend everybody come to, potentially think about drafting, both for themselves on, I mean, all across the sort of levels of the organization. All right, I'll take a little quick pause on that, see if anybody has any thoughts or reactions with those notions before I dive into some like practicals on how we accomplish some of those goals. Right on? All right. Well, we got 15 more minutes. I'm going to run through this last little bit and then have a final little bit of discussion at the end. Thank you all. I've really appreciated this so far and really enjoyed the discussion. So that another section that I wanted to talk to everybody about here a little bit is, then this is something that goes, that's key, I think, to sort of thinking about from the get-go and helps accomplish a bunch of those other things that we talked about earlier on. How do I move from level 1 up to level 3, stuff like that. Talked about a lot in the design communities, this notion of design systems, right? And how we accomplish consistency, how we accomplish expediency, how we accomplish efficiency within the organizations, and all things, of course, is by systematizing them and making processes that enable everybody to work faster and understand things more quickly and more easily, right? So design systems are ways in which we collect a bunch of documentation, et cetera, examples, code, right, specifications that tell us what to do and what we should be happening within the actual sort of manifestation of our overall UX practice, which is in the UI, right? There's a few examples that I'm showing here. One is this notion of what's called atomic design, which is a notion of how we sort of organize parts of our systems, right? And then some others you guys might be familiar with, right, which maybe have leveraged at some point. Bootstrap, which is a framework that Twitter introduced years ago that makes it really easy to build build tools and applications, right? And then material design, Google's system, right, which they employ across Android, which provides a framework for people to actually move quickly, create things that are consistent and easily without having to build it all from the ground up, right? And I highly recommend considering this sort of stuff from the get-go. Obviously, everybody's system will be different, right, in some way or another, because you'll have your own custom needs, but having at least the framework to think about this stuff can help you move much faster and make those steps up from the basics all the way up to something that's polished and really resonates with the audience, right? So thinking about your front end, right? And this, we haven't fully got into it, but this is another thing to think about. We've got a couple of different sort of areas like that to think about with regards to like how we go about putting all this stuff into practice, right? We've got brand and marketing. We haven't talked about that much today, but it's definitely something important to think about, right? But then we've got the areas that I think about a lot, which is product design, user experience, and then engineering. And so this is sort of broken up into the core elements that sort of need to interface with each other in order to put together this, the front end of your dreams that really accomplish all your goals, right? So the brand guidelines, right? We have our architecture and product design guidelines that we might be putting together as part of this system. And then in engineering, right, the way they architect the front end code. All these pieces sort of add up, right, to actually being launched out there. Marketing, web app, mobile app, whatever it is you guys are deploying, right? Another way to think about this sort of stuff when I think about my front end between my design system and strategy is what we call this structure and the elements within it. And this is something we're going to sort of like, I'll wrap up on this a little bit, some of the detailed work on it, but things to think about that relates back to some of the other areas. The elevations we think about with user experience, right? The ways in which we move between the levels of design, right? There's a bunch of different things that come into play when I'm putting this stuff together, right? Base down at the bottom, foundation, base elements that go into building up our experience, the color, type, icons, etc. We combine those into components, components, buttons, forms, etc. Then think about that thematically, how that deploys across. Nowadays, we talk a lot like light, dark, that sort of thing, right? Patterns, which are combinations of those themes, elements, might be navigation. It might be something like a modal system that uses popovers, things like that, right? And then layouts being like the big pieces or the pages, the screens that provide the bulk of the experience and are at the highest level within our sort of structure for the front end. This is helpful in bringing it down at something in beginning, particularly between engineering and design, when we think about the processes over there, how we deliver things, how we make things consistent and so on, right? So just an example of that, and then we'll be, I'll run through the end here to give you some ideas of what, so color, type, icon, grids, right? What's maybe the thing was responsive, how we articulate those things and share them around with the group. The different components that might go into something, right? The buttons, pins, forms. And then last, how we combine those things into patterns. These are some examples from Drone Deploy, where I'm working out right now. And you can see that a few of them are things that would be universal across any sort of tool, right? Toasts, things like that. Some of them are also going to be very specific to what we have and what we're building. Like you might notice in the corner, we have this little thing that we call a mini map, which we use to provide context when navigating georegions. Okay. That was a whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to stop there. We've got another like 10 minutes or so. Any final thoughts, questions, areas that people would like to discuss, or other things that we could chat about later in the week? I'd love to hear it.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
One, before everyone heads out, what would you like to see from the startups to have an in-depth discussion within your office hours? So leave everyone with homework or something that you'd like them to show you at the very beginning, or send ahead of time. You let us know. That's the quick homework for you right now. And my question is, who in a small organization, who would you say is responsible for everything you just showed us? If you don't have a UX team, then who is the responsible to carry out this mission within a small and growing organization?
Absolutely. So the second question, in general, right? In an early organization, the person who's probably going to be most responsible for this is going to be whoever's in charge of product, the head of product, right? And in parallel, in conjunction with a head of design or the first designer, the principal designer, that sort of thing, right? Example, right? Circle Up, the company was out a little while ago, a fintech company, right? I joined it when it was about 10, and there was the CEO, who was the head of product at the time, and the head of engineering, and then me, right? So I was in charge of basically of all the things we just talked about there, from soup to nuts, from beginning to end, but it was definitely a collaboration with those other two, right? Eventually, we pulled in somebody who focused just on product, so the CEO could go back to sort of running the overall business, right? So we had somebody who was the head of product, and then it goes back, those three of us again, product, engineering, and design, who sort of covered all these bases. Now, some of that, right, varies. Again, like who does research goes back and forth, right? That's one of the ones. But when it comes down to a bunch of the stuff I've talked about here, with regard specifically for like the front end, for the flows, for all that sort of stuff that the actual user touches and uses, right? Designing that is on the head of the product or design, or the lead designer. Does that answer your question, Carmen? Great.
Yeah.
The other homework. So there was a method to my madness. There's a reason why I wanted to get everybody into that Moreau board, which was, to your point, if you've got questions and things you'd like to ask, I would love for you to add them in there. And I will take a look over the week. That'll be our place where we can collaborate and have notes. And if you've got specific questions that you'd like to dig in deeper on, put them in there. I'll take a look. Find a little section, write down your name, or even if that little spot we have, and say, here's something that I'd like to talk about. Here's a screen grab of one of the problems that I'm trying to solve from my app, right? Here's some notes. Here's a flow of something that I'm trying to solve. Use that tool, right, to share some of those things, and then we can talk about them later. Now, if there's something that you aren't necessarily comfortable in sharing in a forum like that, right, and you want to be more private, we could create something that would be more individual, but I would definitely encourage you, and in general, if it's something that you're not concerned about maybe some of the other people in the session seeing, put it in there. And if there's something that you feel more proprietary about, we can make another solution for that, but it would be probably I'll share a specific board with you and you can add it in there.
Great.
That answers the question?
Yes, please, if anyone doesn't have access to the Miro board, leave your comment in the chat and we'll solve it after the session. Any other questions?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
Sort of putting things together. You know, I can't remember who it was. Somebody asked about how do you know when you are at the product level, or the 3 levels that you had. And as you can see from the last few slides that Gunther showed here, getting this right requires a lot of skills and principles and tools and patterns and anti-patterns and, just practice. So obviously this is something that, companies mature into. And unless this is your second or third startup and you're starting with a bunch of other people who've also done it before, and you have a lot of money in the bank from investors, then it'll probably just be an evolution, right? It'll be starting with the lowest level and working your way up, and you will know when you're ready, when structurally your team is ready to move on. It's just like software development or anything else, or even building a company. It's you build on top of the past, and it's based on the maturity level of the organization.
Thanks for jumping in and pointing that out, Fernando. And I think you're absolutely right. One thing that I was hoping to do today is obviously is share a whole. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of stuff, right? And not everything is directly applicable in at a given moment or feasible or likely to happen because because of the size of your organization and on the spot you're at. What I'm hoping is that from here and from the information that's included, you can learn a little bit more about it, maybe take away some of these techniques, inform some of what you're doing in order to help with that progression as your organization grows. So yeah, so I hope that's helpful here to everybody. And I certainly am happy to dig in more on specific questions, right, that come up as did earlier. How do I specifically know where I'm at, right? What do I know is the one that's resonating, or what techniques fit within the way I've sort of structured my development process. So yeah, definitely look forward to chatting more with y'all about that. Well, cool. Okay. Hopefully everybody's got access to the tool now. Any other final thoughts and questions in the last 2 minutes here?
Based on what Fernando just said, I also think this is very useful in order to plan for growth. All of you guys are working on your 18-month plan, or are going to be working after this afternoon session, and it's good to take into consideration the things you don't know and the skills you don't have in order to achieve all the goals that are coming ahead. So this, I think, is useful for that, to see what you don't have and what you need to add to your organization at some point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And at no point should anybody feel bad about it or like you're missing. It's all these things are a process of learning, right? Figuring out what works for you, and and continue growth.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much for allowing me to jabber at you and talk at you for the last hour. I certainly enjoyed the conversation. It was great to see some of those questions that came up a little bit earlier. And yeah, please, as we said, add your stuff to the board, and I look forward to chatting with you further.
Great, Gunther. I don't have access to Miro, so please add me, and I'll take a look at what everyone keeps adding there, and I'll WhatsApp you in order to set up those office hours.
All right.
Yeah.
Cheers, all. Have a great morning.
Thanks,
right,
everyone.
thanks, Gunther.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Gunther.
Gunther.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Bye.